Speak quickly, Outlander.
So, do you know what's crazy? I never thought that I would be the one to make one of these, because last year I wrote a couple of articles and one of them was about this thing behind me. I'm pretty sure that this is a Neolithic barrow from, the Neolithic. And I wrote about that and I presented my findings and I sent my findings to a bunch of different places. Some of them said they thought that it might be correct, and some of them left me unread, and that's fine. But the article did pretty well. I also put it on the internet around the places. And in the article I reference another place, which I think is a later Viking burial site. And I just found out that the National Museum of Denmark, I think, came over here and they took some pictures of that other burial site. They've definitely read the article. I've checked the IP logs. Someone from near one of their offices has at least opened the link that I sent them. They didn't talk to me before coming over here, inform me that they were going to do it and they were going to come and do some ground penetrating scans, which they just kind of like did out of nowhere. They haven't been talking about this place for decades. I think the only reason that they didn't go out to this one and do some research on this one is because it is too far away from a road, and I've noticed that museum people in Denmark are kind of fat. So I just kind of think that it was too far away for them to easily come and do some scans, because they're gonna have to hike all the way here. And two, I don't think I put any precise coordinates or definitive place names, because this thing doesn't have a definitive place name. It is, to the locals, it is literally just called the rock pile. I'm not fucking kidding you, which is funny. So it doesn't really have an official name. It's not on any map. I think it might be like on the map of big rocks, which is not going to tell you anything, because there are so many big rocks on this island, because it's pretty close to like the Scandinavian peninsula. Not a lot of people read articles, and that's completely fine, but a lot of people watch YouTube videos. A lot of people watch YouTube videos in the background. So I'm just going to read you the article that I wrote, because in case the museum at any point goes out here and start taking some scans and they discover that this is indeed a Neolithic monument from the Neolithic era, there will be hopefully a couple of thousand people that will have watched the video of me reading the article and can, say, hey, this guy, he actually found this thing before, and you probably know that he found this thing because you only learned about this thing because he found it. And like, I'm not even mad, but fuck the government sometimes. Like, you could have just texted me and been like, hey, we saw the article, that seems cool, we're gonna check it out. Like, that's the only thing I wanted. I just wanted, for the thing to be discovered so that we would know about it and it would like contribute to the progression of us knowing things about our past. And I also, would like to be credited when I find something cool, because that's gonna make me want to find more cool things. And I've done more archaeological discoveries on this island in the last 6 months than the government has done in 60 years. So maybe you should credit me so that I feel appreciated. I mean, my work is clearly good enough to come and steal. So just credit me. So I'm gonna read the article now. I'm not really mad. I'm actually mostly just kind of like, I'm gonna go out to this pile of rocks and I'm gonna read the article I wrote so that there would be evidence that I am, I don't want to say better than these people, but that I'm good at what I do. Just pretend that this video is like super fancy and high quality, because I wanted to do a super fancy and high quality video with like a lot of glamour shots and drone whatever thing is, but I can't because the government sucks. There's a story from the 1700s about a man walking along this very shoreline. That'll be the shoreline somewhere over there. A ship has recently wrecked off the coast, and valuable salvage has started to drift inland. Bigger and more organized salvage parties have gone out to the wreck itself in small boats to secure the most valuable cargo. And the local tax authorities will have their hands full making sure they get their cut of the bounty on behalf of the crown. The tax office where they used to be is right up in town over here. So whatever valuables the man can find here on the beach, he can probably take with him home without having to pay the taxman his dues. We don't know if he found anything valuable beach cargo, but we do know that he came across a corpse of a beach sailor. He robbed him of his valuable possessions and gave him a hasty burial, so no one would be able to spot the corpse from a distance. And then he went home. So all over the island, from the coast to the town, there used to be these places called thief roads, which were just places where people would stash the things that they took from the beach, because obviously the tax collectors knew when people were out combing the beach for valuable salvage. So and since there were no trees on the island, you would be able to see the taxman very, very far away. So you could throw the loot in a hole, quickly cover it, and then you could meet the taxman and you can just pretend that nothing happened. So there should still be loot around from especially the 1600s all over the island, because naturally, people would not always remember where they buried their stuff. Here's the thing though. We're on the island of Læsø, and here the dead do not stay dead unless they are given proper funerals in consecrated ground. So the sailor he robbed came back later that night as a drukker, and he showed up at the man's house and demanded to be given proper funeral rites. The sailor made the argument that since the thief had taken his purse, the sailor had paid for his own funeral, and he expected the thief to give him one. The next day, for what I assume was a terrible night's sleep, if he got any at all, the man made the journey out to Hornfiskerøen where he originally found the corpse, and he exhumed the sailor and dug him a proper grave. To mark the grave, he built a stone structure which still stands here to this day. He used the money he stole to buy a chandelier that he donated to the local church. And that would be the grave. Oh well, Because it's a good story, sure, but I don't think that it's true. Because for one, there is no record of any of the church's chandeliers being donated by a man who was doing it as penance for wronging a drukker. The church has kept records of all of the chandeliers that hang in it and who donated them. And chandeliers like these aren't things you can just go out and buy, especially not on this island, at least not back in the day. And something just didn't sit right with me about the grave. So sometime later when I was in the area, I decided to go pay it a visit. When I arrived at the site, I got the feeling that you sometimes get when you're alone in a room, but you can feel that something is watching you, because you can kind of sense that there's something in the room that shouldn't be there, but you can't sense who or you can't sense what. I couldn't put my finger on what it was that wasn't adding up, so I went home and life went on. But over the last 6 months, figuring out what this thing is and why the story doesn't add up has become an obsession of mine. And it led me to making what very well may be one of the largest archaeological discoveries in this country in recent times. And the fascinating thing is that I didn't uncover this structure's mysteries by excavating the site. I found the answers I was looking for in the local folklore and in the Icelandic sagas. And today I want to tell you the story of the mysterious island monument. I learned about this story because I was reading about my local area's history. I was reading a travel journal by the famous Danish explorer Axel Friis. He visited my island in 1924, and he wrote about the people that lived here, the flora, the fauna. He was a man of science, and he wrote about everything he saw with the kind of detail that only dedicated scientists and scholars could. But he also wrote about the sea drukker, the vengeful spirits of the dead sailors that came back to get revenge on the islanders that dared to rob their corpses. And he wrote about the things with the same level of details and matter-of-fact way that he did everything else, and that fascinated me. I had to know more, so I investigated these beings. And throughout my research, a place name kept appearing all over the place. Hals Cemetery. On the island, there are 3 towns, Vesterø, Byrum and Østerby. But before there was Østerby, there was Hals. It was located a couple of kilometers west where Østerby is today, and it was destroyed in an event called the Sand Flight in the 1600s. The islanders had felled all the trees on the islands, so there were no roots to keep the ground in check, and sand started to gather in massive dunes, and they traveled around the north coasts of the island and destroyed everything in their path. And one day the dunes swallowed Hals Church, and it destroyed the surrounding town. So what does that have to do with the Dråker? They only start appearing in our historical records after the church was destroyed, and they disappear from the records after the new church in Østerby was built and the surviving inventory from Hals Church was moved into it. Almost like destroying that holy place angered the gods and sent the Dråkers to the island, and rebuilding that holy place calmed the gods again. But I don't think it angered the man upstairs, because something stuck out to me that Friis wrote about the cemetery. There was always an unease in that place. When people arrived in the grounds in the morning, there was often a round spot where the grass had been trampled down and was free of morning dew. It was evidence that the dead had danced there at night. Which reminded me of something from the sagas. See, Læsø is home of Ægir and Ran, the Norse gods of the sea. But in the sagas themselves, Ægir is a powerful but mortal warlock who gets invited to feast with the gods because of his mastery of sorcery and unmatched mastery of brewing meat. They have a grand time at the feast, and Ægir then invites the gods to come to a feast on Læsø, and they dine in his subterranean hall. The gods are very impressed that the trays of food aren't carried out by servants, but seemingly just thrown through the air themselves and are placed in front of the guests. But what if the trays didn't float through the air themselves? What if they were instead carried out by invisible ghostly servants, like the ones that dance on the cemetery grounds at night and trample the grass? What if Ægir's subterranean hall is located where Hals churches once stood? His wife's role in the Norse pantheon is to ferry the souls of dead sailors into the underworld, which would have been her home. And if the church was sitting on the top of the gateway to the underworld, it would have been buried along with the church when the sand flight ran it over, and Ran wouldn't have been able to ferry the souls to the underworld because the gate would physically be shut. While that story is obviously impossible to verify, we do know that the Vikings had a settlement nearby where the church was, and if they had a settlement, they would also have a burial site. And since Ægir was a mortal, he would at some point have died, and he would need to be buried, as would everyone else that lived here on the island, even before the advent of Christianity. So a typical Viking burial site. It looks like a picture that's gonna hopefully appear right over there. And the site where Hals church once stood is gonna look like a picture that's gonna appear over here. Yeah, it's probably a Viking burial mound that was hidden under a Christian church for a couple of 100 years. And yeah, it's probably the origin of several stories from the Norse sagas, but it might be older, because this style of burial mound wasn't an invention by the Vikings. They just, innovated on it. It was used all the way back in Megalithic and the Neolithic era, where they replaced the dolmen burial mounds at some point during the transition between those two time periods. Dolmens look like, you're gonna see a picture over here if you're curious. This is the Troldkirke. It is near the town of Nibe on the mainland, and is one of the most famous Neolithic sites in Denmark, and one of the most well-preserved ones. And, well, you've been staring at this thing the entire time I've been reading this article. And yeah, I think this mysterious island dolmen, as I've come to call it, is a dolmen from the early Neolithic era, or the Stone Age as we call it, left behind by the Fallenbeker culture. We do know that they were here. We found fragments of their tools and the pottery that gave them their name, but until now we haven't found any trace of settlement on the island. It was believed that they only stayed here temporarily, probably during seal hunting season. Until now, that is, because, well, it's there. We've since found out that these sites were probably originally used as markers to show where someone had claimed land during the sort of like early farming culture era. So you would only build one of these, if it was permanent, which we're gonna get to. I'm getting ahead of myself. Because these things, they took time to build. And, you know, there are probably also places where they honored their dead, because if you have a thing in the landscape that is easily recognizable, it kind of like makes sense to also bury your people there, especially if your burials consist of lighting people on fire. The sort of practical thing is that on the mainland, these things would have been all over the country, and they would have primarily been on hills. So the neighboring village or tribe would actually have been able to see if a person in a nearby village was getting buried, because they would be placed inside, and then their corpses would be lit on fire. So they would be able to like see that fire in the distance. And I think it's kind of like beautiful that you'd signal out to the surrounding area where you live that, oh yeah, we lost this person today and we are honoring them. And I think that's cool. But that's not in the article itself. Sorry. But yeah, if they took the time to honor their dead, they must have lived here on a more permanent basis. But how do we prove that this is a structure left behind by the Funnenbeaker culture? Okay, let's go back to the dolmen on the mainland, and let's compare the two sites. We do know from local legends about the Trollkirke on the mainland that the locals named it that because they thought it was the work of the devil, because only the devil would be able to move boulders that huge. It was impossible for the peasant to fathom the construction of anything bigger than whatever the largest church around them was. And if a whole community can't even begin to comprehend how to construct something like this, then how can one guy on an island that definitely didn't have the knowledge or the technology to do this build all of this all by himself? Sorry, low battery. I did not charge my phone before going out here. This was a half-cocked idea. I'm not a very smart man, if this is your first time seeing me. Okay, so around the dolmen itself, we can see that just like on the mainland, there's a clear outline of boulders that form a sort of like ship shape, which I have always thought was because like they're gonna sail into the afterlife, kind of like the ferrymen from Greek mythology and all of that. They kind of like make sense that, you know, that's a ship or whatever. And the dolmen itself is always the tallest rock in the formation, so it kind of like acts like a sail for the ship. And that's also where you place the dead person when you burn them alive. No, don't burn them when they're dead. We can see over here, I'm probably going to put a picture of that it has a row of boulders that matches the rows that we see on other dolmens. And a little ways off the side, there is a part that very much looks like it could be a stone dock. And on the mainland, we find a similar formation of rocks a little way away from the main site. Yeah, so both sites are located on the highest point where the sea was when they were constructed, which is where the sort of dock place is on this island, and also where it is on the mainland. And also kind of seems like these boulders have acted as geographical markers, which I mentioned earlier when I went off script. For when ships were sailing by, well, they would have been giant canoes in the very early days when these things were used. And what further points towards the one on this island being man-made is that there is a dirt hill that it rests on, which is the highest point on the island. But if we look at how the island was formed, we can see that the Dolmen's Hill is not the origin point of the island. The origin point is actually over there somewhere. When islands like these form, the oldest point will be the tallest point, and it's not. So something happened here to create this dirt hill, and I'm guessing that it's human intervention. And I don't know if this is relevant, but the site seems to be in the shape of a hammer if the dock itself is included. And if you look through the eye of the dolmen, it points straight to the island of Samsø, in place where we know that the Funnenbeaker culture settled. And we also know now that the story the Odyssey originates from could have traveled from Scandinavia during around this time period. So the hammer imagery, which is, you know, in Norse mythology, it would probably have existed because Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, to a lesser degree, is very much in the style of a Norse epic. So it is possible that the hammer was around much before than we think, and that they could have built this place in the shape of a hammer because it was kind of a symbol to them. All of this evidence pointing towards the dolmen being from the Stone Age is all technically circumstantial. Yes, it looks like there is a harbor and a path leading up to the main structure, but it just looks like it. We can't say that it was made by human hand or not. And yeah, there is a stone fence over there that looks like it was made up of large boulders, and it would look like it was arranged, but we don't have any way of knowing if those boulders were moved by human hand or not. And yeah, the structure is the tallest point on the island, despite that point not being the first to rise from the sea. And we can see when we look at a map of the island that it does point towards the structure and the surrounding area being man-made. But we know that the island temporarily sunk sometime during the Bronze Age because of a massive earthquake snapped the island in half. And it is possible that it altered the terrain here, creating a new tallest point that wasn't the oldest tallest point on the island. I do think that these stones out here are not part of the structure today, but were probably at some point, but that they were moved by the earthquake and the flood, but that's just my personal theory. And we have no way of confirming or denying any of that. And that's kind of where I originally stopped writing about this stuff, but there's a reason that I ended up publishing it. Because it was frustrating having come this close. Everything here looked exactly like it did on the mainland, and I didn't have any doubt that it was from way before the 1700s. But to make that claim, I felt like I needed at least one piece of empirical proof that dated this site to before its alleged construction year. So, I sat down in the front of the rock and I stared at it. And then I saw a crack in the rock in the dolmen. And it's right over there. And the crack had lichen growing inside of it. I realized that the rock must have cracked during the construction probably when the big boulder was put into place. You can use lichen to date when a rock was unearthed by measuring the size of the lichen growing on it and taking into account what climate the rock is located in. But I couldn't do that to measure the lichen in the crack, because the climate here is just too inconsistent, and lichen can grow very quickly or very slowly depending on environmental factors. But you know what I could? I could use the lichen on other boulders to figure out how long they had been in that position. Lichen doesn't grow in the shade, and it cannot grow underwater. We can see here on the island dolmen that there is no lichen growing under it. But on the mainland we can see that the boulders inside the chamber have lichen on them. That lichen was growing on the boulder when it was exposed to the sun, but it went dormant when the boulder was put in the position that it is now. The reason the island dolmen doesn't have any lichen growing under it is that the island was underwater for most of the Bronze Age, only surfacing again about 3,000 to 2,500 years ago. And being underwater for so long would have killed all of the lichen on all of the rocks around here. So we can see by how the lichen has been growing on the dolmen that the dolmen has been in this exact configuration since the island resurfaced. And the diameter of this lichen patch covering these rocks is way too big to have grown to this size in just under 300 years in even the best of conditions. And the fact that there's absolutely no lichen on the shaded part of the rocks proves without a shadow of a doubt that they've been in this exact position since the island sank. Meaning that we can confirm that this dolmen and the site around it is the remnant of the Funnelbeaker culture left behind by them about 7,500 to 6,000 years ago. And that brings us to here. What began as a folk tale about a vengeful Draugr became a story that bridged mythology, geology, and archaeology. The dolmen here stands as proof that the Funnelbeakers did more than just pass through. They lived here, they built here, they died here. This discovery adds an entire new chapter to this island's history and positions Læsø as a much more important part of the Stone Age in Denmark than we previously thought. The discovery also acts as a reminder that folklore is not just superstition. Local legends can preserve fragments of memory about very old sites. Archaeology often treats folklore with caution, but this discovery demonstrates that stories can encode a real trace of history and should be taken seriously as research leads. This site proves that there are more discovery to be made out there, secrets hiding in plain sight. It's a bridge between legend and evidence, and it challenges us to both look closer at myths that surround us. Because who knows what else is out there, what's hiding out there, when a local ghost story can preserve the memory of a 5,000-year-old burial mound hiding in plain sight. The story of the mysterious island monument has already rewritten a chapter of this island history, and perhaps it will inspire archaeologists to excavate the site, because who knows what secrets we will find out there beneath the burial chamber in the dolmen. And apparently they are interested. They just can't find it. And presently, I don't feel like helping them. I've actually decided that I'm a little mad because I did spend a lot of time on this. I went to the mainland. I think I went to like 12 different sites. I've probably spent like maybe like conservatively I've spent at least 2,000 euros of this of my own money. Less conservatively I've spent around 10,000 because I've also gone out of my way to go visit these monuments in other countries like Wales and Germany and France. Which, I mean, I didn't just go there for that purpose, but I went there also because I thought it was interesting. But yeah, now I'm putting out there that I found this thing, and if it turns out this was from, this was a burial mound or a place marker or whatever from the Stone Age, then I'm the guy that found it first. It was not the National Museum of Denmark, it was me. I mean, I didn't find it, I just kind of like made a good theory that it was from then. We've always known that this is here. We've just thought that it was something completely different, and it's not. It's definitely, I think, from the Stone Age. It's just too well built to be random. Like, it can't just be like a random stone thing that came down here during the last ice age. Like, it doesn't make sense. But I hope you've enjoyed watching this or listening to it in the background. I'm guessing that the sound is going to be awful, but I hope it's not. And if this does numbers, I'll make another one. I found other stuff that's cool. And I'm normally like not this pissy. I'm normally super optimistic. And I am super optimistic about this. Just sometimes the government sucks. And we need to tell them that they suck. But yeah, that's it. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I know I'm gonna have. I'm gonna walk home now. It's like 5 kilometers or something. So yeah. See ya.